Now on Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there will probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there. Getting our Monday off to a great start with Morgan Streetman. And I need a good Monday today because I spent the weekend doing my taxes.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It is
I'm one of
tax
those procrastinators.
season.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, and you would do it on your own, wouldn't you?
Yes, I do it on my own.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's brave.
Well, she's bright is what she
I
is.
got two, yes. I have to pay.
It's not that with TurboTax, you just...
If I knew you do taxes, I'd let you do mine. I'd have given you the $250.
Want me to do that? Okay.
You'd let her do yours. I love that, Pat
I'd
George.
give her the $250.
Yeah. She's signing up for that. I can see right away.
I pay my taxes $250, and I get $280 back.
Nice.
So I made $30.
Nice. Pocket
There you
that.
go.
Yeah, right. And I love how everybody's like, when you get money back.
Right.
I made
That
money.
means
yeah.
you already paid into
Right.
it. Yes.
People
You
don't
didn't make any
understand
money.
that.
Right. But, you know.
You gave the government a loan.
That's the language of the marketing today, isn't it? They try to confuse you about what's really going on there. Yeah, and I'm one who's a big believer on you don't want to overpay your taxes on the front end.
No.
So that you can get a nice refund on the back end. Because that's like you say, that's a loan without interest to the government. Mm-hmm. So,
and I don't know why, but leading into this tax season, I heard so much news about people were going to be upset that they're not getting as much back. Then, chatting with people I know, I didn't encounter that. So again, that's maybe just something you put out there that's a negative spin on the tax reform that's taken place.
well, I do have to say, it seems like each year the number of deductions and other things that you can take advantage of have been decreasing. I have to be honest, I don't follow the tax situation all that closely because, as you know, from a big picture perspective, it interests me, but the details and the minutia of it do not particularly interest me. And I think that's probably how most people are. You know, from a big picture, they might say, I want less taxes, and I'm interested in taxes from that perspective, but I don't really want to sit down and go through deductions and other things with you and have to learn the tax code if I can avoid it. But it seems to me like the last couple of years,
The standard deduction is going up.
well, but my accountant's like, oh, you can't deduct this or you can't deduct that. And, it hasn't been how it's been in years past.
Right.
So I see that deductions are going away. And that may be some of what people are feeling is that there's a change, and at least in their mind, it's not benefiting them. Of course, I think it would probably benefit all of us if we could just get to a simpler. Now, it wouldn't benefit the accountants, no offense, but it would benefit most normal tax-paying people.
It would benefit everybody.
If we could just get to something simple.
I think even I think some tax accountants would say it would be nice if we would just have a simpler system. Absolutely.
Yeah, like a flat tax and no loopholes, no deductions, no complicated forms to fill out, just really simple stuff.
I know my accountant has to go to class every year.
Yeah.
Spend time in class,
Right,
not all year, but different times of the year to catch up.
To try to keep up with all the changes.
Was it
I
easier?
like to do my taxes. I know this sounds
Was it easier
weird.
this year? You did yours. Was it easier than last year?
Well, the only thing that made it easier is I just took the standard deduction instead of having to, and I still went through and input all of my deductions to see which was going to be higher.
Mm-hmm. So instead of itemizing this year, it made better sense for you to go with standard.
Right.
Yeah. And
to that, so that would make it simpler for people.
Yeah. I do think that probably comes from them taking away some of the different itemized deductions. Now it's getting to be maybe you just take the standard anymore because there aren't as many little itemized deductions. And
Bigger, usually.
It's a good thing we brought that up because it's a week away.
Yeah, that's right. If you hadn't started on that, be advised you have 1 week to get all that done. And I wanted to take a quick look back this week at the General Flynn story. And folks, by the way, if you want to get on the line with us and voice your opinion, or if you have any questions or comments about any of these topics, we'd love to hear from you at 888-404-1010. And this next topic, General Flynn, is one which I'm kind of curious to know if any of our listening audience has an opinion on whether or not General Flynn ought to be pardoned or not, because I think that's kind of an issue that's out there and certainly in play, at least as far as I'm concerned, as somebody who's kind of watched the evidence and watched what developed with the Mueller investigation and how corrupt that was in so many ways. But one of the things that we've learned very recently this week is that some of the allegations about General Flynn And, I mean, understand this man is a highly decorated person who has served our country with honor and distinction for decades. I mean, the idea that we would throw around loosely that such a person could be a Russian asset or a Russian spy in some way, to me, is really disrespectful to who General Flynn is and who he demonstrated for all those decades that he was through his service to our country, his valuable service to our country. So I'm really offended by some of the things that were thrown around, but you may or may not remember this. One of the things that was thrown around by somebody who we've mentioned on the show before, which is Malcolm Nance, if you've heard me mention that name before. But Malcolm Nance actually threw around, he's a sometime MSNBC commentator, and he actually threw around the allegations that General Flynn was involved in a honeypot, having an extramarital affair with a KGB agent. Well, that alleged, and the fact is this person is not a KGB agent, as the facts come to be, but that alleged KGB agent has now come forward on Twitter last week, and her name is Svetlana Lokhova, and she's at Real S. Lokhova, Lokhova, at Real S. Lokhova is her Twitter handle, because we're not going to be able to cover all of the details of her story and do it real justice, but I think you need to go out there and look at her tweets, because she covers what the setup was. And you're not going to believe it, folks. Well, maybe you would believe it if you've been listening to this show. But basically, you remember the name Stefan Halper? He's that professor emeritus at Cambridge University in England who was working with MI6 and basically became a spy for the government against the President Trump's campaign before he was president. Now, they make a huge deal about never referring to him as a spy and instead saying he was some kind of a confidential informant for the FBI. But this is the same guy, remember, who had a hand in setting up George Papadopoulos? Well, guess what he was doing at Cambridge? He decided to create this group called the Cambridge Security Initiative with a friend of his there, and they decided to hold an event at which they invited General Flynn to as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So because of his position, they invited him over to this event. And they set this lady, Svetlana Lokhova, up to make a presentation at dinner at the event, supposedly to show off the analysis skills of the Cambridge Security Initiative that they were setting up. Now, this lady wound up sitting across the table. It was a round table. This dinner meeting was conducted in February 2014 at Cambridge University in England. And this lady wound up sitting across the table from General Flynn. They had a very short discussion about some documents that she had back from the Stalin era that she was kind of sharing. And again, she was prompted to do this by Stefan Halper. And she lays all this out in her tweets. Well, that was the end of the actual relationship, was that one dinner meeting in England where she sort of talked across the table to General Flynn. And from that, we get the allegations by Malcolm Nance and others that there was some kind of an extramarital affair going on between General Flynn and this lady, among many other allegations. So I want you to go out there and check this out and just look at the way these people were treated. I mean, this is a man of great distinction who should be treated with honor, and he was set up, by our own government, by the Obama administration. And it's a real shame, and it's a black mark on the operation of our government that they did this. And just so you know, the U.S. Department of Defense under President Obama, do you know how much we paid to Stefan Halper between the years 2012 and 2018? So over 6 years, we paid him over $1 million. That's like $200,000 a year we paid this guy for his work. And what was he primarily doing? Primarily, he was setting up the Trump campaign so that they could run an intelligence operation against him, look into all their phone calls, all their emails, and try to dig up some kind of dirt against him so that Trump could not become president. And I think that is a real shame, and I think that kind of behavior is exactly the reason that President Trump needs to give serious consideration to pardoning General Michael Flynn.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, and folks, stick with us because we've got a lot to cover in this show, and one of the things we want to do is take a little break from some of the seriousness and talk about our local interest segment, which, Roxanne, I know you've done some some killer research on.
Yes, this is local interest. It is Florida, a little bit south of us, the Everglades, but something we all need to be wary of.
Our very own swamp down south. Well, there's some big old snakes in that swamp.
Yes, and they just caught a really big one. A female python in the Florida Everglades that was more than 17 feet long, weighed 140 pounds, and contains 73 developing eggs. That's the scary part.
Oh, my gosh. What can you imagine? Now, I've actually been down there camping. Can you imagine running into one of those things? Oh, man.
Terrifying.
The Cypress Preserve you were camping in?
Yeah, I did. I did that about 10 years ago. I went down to Big Cypress. Yeah, I was more fit back then.
How are the mosquitoes?
Bad. And that's when I learned that thermo, whatever it is, stuff, that really works. Because if it can keep the mosquitoes off you in the Everglades, and I can't remember the name of it offhand, but if it can keep them off you in the Everglades, it'll keep them off of you anywhere. Well, folks, we got a lot to cover when we come back. We're going to talk about the border.
Great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall.
Build the wall! Build the wall!
And that was our friends from the Cigar Wrappers with their song Build the Wall, a fan favorite around here. And we wanted to lead into our second segment with that song because today we've got for you some clips from some officials who were down on the border last week meeting with President Trump in front of one of the sections of wall that apparently has been built, although I don't know exactly when it was built, but there's a 30-foot section of wall that they had a press conference in front of. And basically, the reason we wanted to bring this to our listeners is because, there's a lot of confusion out there. And if you listen to anything that the mainstream media is telling you, they generally seem to be saying that there's no border crisis and that it's all fabricated.
No, not too many came over the border this weekend.
Only 100,000 this weekend. My goodness. But
well, it just is the two completely different viewpoints it's reported from as well.
Right.
Because if you watch CNN, it's all about the migrants and how difficult it is. Of course it is. And then if you read other news publications, which you can't find via Google search, you have to go to the direct site, then you see all of these stories that are pretty terrifying. So there seems to be a very big imbalance in both sides.
Right. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting about some of the folks that spoke at this press conference is they're the actual officials who are dealing with this. And so this was a press conference just last Friday, April 5th, in Calexico, California. And that's a border town that really straddles the border. And the California side of it's called Calexico, like Mexico, Calexico. And the Mexican side is called Mexicali. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But anyway, that's where they were. It's called the El Centro sector of the border. And CBP, Custom and Border Patrol's chief patrol agent in that sector named Gloria Chavez, she had some comments to make about the president's policies, and she was strongly in support. So I want you to listen to her because here's somebody who works on the border, who cares about the Border Patrol agents that work for her, and she says that there is a crisis and we do need a wall.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the chief here in El Centro, we're very appreciative of this wall. These men and women out here in this area of 2 miles were experiencing a high number of assaults and use of force incidents. This was prior to this wall being built. This is a 30-foot border wall that are pillar bollards, and you can see through it. For us, it's a huge advantage to see what's on the other side, because before, with the old landing mat, we could not see the adversary. We couldn't see the threat that was on that side. We would get rocked constantly. We would get items thrown at us every day. With this 30-foot wall, we haven't had those type of incidents. Just here in these 2 miles, our assaults have dropped by 65% just in this area. That's very important to me as a chief because I don't want our agents hurt. I want them out here protecting the country and doing their job.
So you see what's important to her is the safety of her agents, and what she's saying is that the wall really dramatically increases the safety of her agents. And now let's hear from a sheriff who happens to be the sheriff of Kern County, California, which is actually up a little bit north of the border, and is the sheriff where, if you know Congressman Kevin McCarthy, where his district is. And this gentleman named Donnie Youngblood, Sheriff Donnie Youngblood, also says that there's a crisis, and he supports the need for a border wall. So let's listen to him.
I'm a sheriff from the Central Valley of California, and I have 3 other Central Valley sheriffs. We feel this impact from 400 miles away. Each of us have experienced heinous crimes that are committed by people in our country illegally. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank this president for doing the right thing and standing up for law enforcement in this country.
So, folks, when you're thinking about this issue, one of the things that I think you need to be deciding is whether or not you want to stand up for law enforcement in this country.
What else do you need when you hear that?
Thank you. Thank you, Pat George. That's kind of what I was thinking. That's why I wanted to bring it here to our listeners. Now, you're right. You don't need anything else, but I did bring you one more, and that's Pima County, Arizona Sheriff Mark Napier. Now, Pima County is actually the largest county that sits on the border. So he actually has the largest portion of the border within his county of any other sheriff. Let's hear from Sheriff Mark Napier.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Napier. I'm the Sheriff of Pima County, Arizona. I am the largest border county in the United States. The strategic deployment of physical barriers along our southern border will always be part of the picture of border security, which is absolutely fundamentally necessary for humanitarian reasons, public safety reasons, and also for national security reasons. Anyone who would suggest that we do not have a crisis on our southern border is being intellectually dishonest to the point of being dishonest with malice. We have a humanitarian crisis which is very clear and compelling. We have a compelling crisis of public safety with human trafficking, drug trafficking, sex trafficking coming up through the border. This is not make-believe. This is something that we live with every day as border sheriffs. So we applaud the efforts of the current administration to secure our border. It's long overdue. And those who would argue that we do not have a crisis on our southern border need to come to my part of the world and see what's really going on.
Yeah,
I don't know how you could be more clear.
Yeah, what more is it that you need to help make the decision about what's really going on here? I mean, here the sheriff of a border county says that the folks who are saying there's no border crisis are being intellectually dishonest to the point of malice, meaning that they simply can't be innocent. Malice means that they've got a bad mindset, an evil mindset. And so he's laying it right out. This is not make-believe. And folks, if you're confused about what's going on the border down there, there's a couple of things you can do. You can either listen to those officials who are down there doing this work day in and day out and hear what they're telling you, because they're making it pretty clear to you right there. We just shared that with you. Or you could go there yourself and see for yourself what's going on down there.
What Trump needs to do is he just needs, look, I think I was wrong. We don't need the wall. We don't need that security. I give it gone. And then it'll sway. But I go, well, we've done some research.
You're right.
He needs to do the old reverse psychology rope-a-dope on him.
Or do the old, hey, guess what? I was a Republican president, but I'm changing my party while I'm in office. That's never been done before.
Gosh, it's so frustrating.
And then everything he does will be perfect.
He could single-handedly destroy the Democrat Party by switching parties right now, couldn't he? Saying, hey, I'm a Democrat. They would all run. There would be no more Democrat
Can you do
Party.
that legally?
I don't think you can do that, no, without the party agreeing to it. But hey, why not, right? Why not give it a shot? And speaking of giving it a shot, did you hear some of what went on at Al Sharpton's National Action Network meeting last week? I mean, he had all the Democrat presidential candidates in to speak. And, of course, one of our personal favorites, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was there, sharing some nuggets of wisdom, which she always shares. And we wanted to start out because, a lot of what she does, if you watch her repeatedly, is she's a very motivational person. She's really there to motivate people to understand that if she could do this, whatever it is she's doing, then anybody could do it. And frankly, I have to agree, pretty much anybody could do what she's doing. But let's hear from her. And what I think is particularly funny about some of these clips is you'll notice how the audience kind of misses the applause lines. They're obviously not tracking, or maybe they're not believing some of the things that she's saying, which she thinks are going to be applause lines.
I, in fact, am encouraged when people remind the country of my past, not because of anything about my story, but because it communicates that if I could work in a restaurant and become a member of the United States Congress, so can you. So can you.
Wow. You hear that overwhelming applause from the audience there? I bet they really believe that they, too, could become a member of Congress just like she did, just because she said so, right? Or maybe they know the truth. Maybe they know the truth is the only reason she became a member of Congress is because somebody with a lot of money wanted to put her there. But we really have to appreciate when she gets philosophical, because I think that's really when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is at her best. And she did not disappoint.
Philosophical and economical.
Oh, yeah, when she gets economical is even better, right? Because that's when we start talking tippy tops, right? But right now, let's talk about her philosophy, because she's going to explain to you about radicalism and what it means philosophically.
What we need to do in radically deep problems is propose radically visionary solutions. Because radical doesn't mean crazy. Radical means addressing the root, addressing the rot. And that is why we have proposed a Green New Deal for the future of America.
You gotta love it, when she gets into playing around with the words. It's addressing the root, addressing the rot. I mean, you just gotta love this kind of thought process. And one of the things I love is that she then follows on and she explains to us the Green New Deal. And folks, you're not gonna believe some of the things that the Green New Deal includes. I mean, it is like a laundry list of a wish list. It's a wish list of progressive, if you want to call them progressive, causes and other things. It's not just about a Green New Deal for America. It's about a total remaking of America. And because you hear that music
Economically.
there...
Yes.
Economically, exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about, is the economic justice aspect of what she said. And she gets into a lot of detail on what she thinks about that. And folks, part of what we're trying to do here is teach you what it means to be a radical. And she's going to explain that even further in the next segment as we take you through some of what she says the Green New Deal means, what she says about historically disenfranchised groups, and other things that she thinks are wrong with the United States of America.
You going to do more on the crazy train?
Is that all aboard the train to Hawaii?
Yeah, right.
All aboard that crazy train.
That is one long train trip to Hawaii.
We were talking to Ocasio-Cortez and hearing some of her latest statements and philosophical thoughts and ponderings. And you have to always remember when you're listening to these is that she does believe she is your boss when it comes to climate change.
That's right. And if she doesn't do it, nobody else will, obviously, she thinks. But let's hear her explain what it is that she's talking about doing, the Green New Deal, right? Now, it's funny because she doesn't even seem to know whether it's legislation or resolution or what exactly it is, but she certainly knows that it includes all kinds of things like single-payer health care, tuition-free college, the end of mass incarceration, the end of the war on drugs, examining and pursuing a policy of reparations, and fixing the opioid crisis. I mean, what does the Green New Deal not include, folks?
Within that legislation, and rather within that resolution, we do not shy away from bold conversations of healthcare, housing, and education as human rights, of living wages and dignified work, of policy that isn't just drafted with the next election in mind, but also with the next generation in mind. That is the moral, political, and economic underpinning of making bold investments and dignified jobs, because that is the necessary plan to fix the pipes in Flint and clean the air in the South Bronx, and to create unionized energy jobs for transitioning workers in Appalachia and West Virginia, for single-payer health care and Medicare for all, and tuition-free public colleges and universities to prepare our nation for the future, and for the end to mass incarceration, the war on drugs, examining and pursuing an agenda of reparations, and fixing the opioid crisis too.
What does it not include? What does it not include? It includes everything. Folks, if you were having any trouble following that, I think she's got a little bit to clarify here for you. And I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, because I want you to hear what she says about the historically disenfranchised and what this might actually do and what we're fighting against.
So what we are fighting for are the policies that are concentrated in working people and communities of color and the historically disenfranchised to make that more possible in America, to make us be a nation that keeps its promise and lives up to the words in our founding charter. So I want to thank you all again for joining us here today. And I think it's a very important morning because with our work, and if we organize and if we fight like we've never fought before, then it is entirely possible that we just listened to someone who will be the next president of the United States this morning.
Woohoo. I mean, it is entirely possible that we just listen to somebody. Now, I think you got to listen to the whole thing, folks. You got to go out there and listen to Ocasio-Cortez because she really goes on a couple of tangents. One of them she goes on is about Dr. Martin Luther King, and I think this really identifies for you where she's really coming from, because what she says in this clip essentially is that racial injustice is actually the root cause of economic inequality in our country. Folks, this is identity politics, and this is not going to lead us to anywhere good. Listen to what she has to say about this.
His To the Mountaintop speech the night before his passing was around laborers and unionized workers. He was imagining an America beyond Vietnam. He was speaking to the ideals that all labor has dignity, all while educating our country about our own history, and that the forces of bigotry and racism are not separate or particularly different from the fight for economic dignity. They are inextricable from it. Not only because racial injustice exacts itself economically, as we saw in 2008 when Black Americans faced a disproportionate burden of subprime loans. We don't just see it exact environmentally, as we saw with children drinking poisoned water in Flint, or in my own backyard, children breathing dirty air in the South Bronx. But also bigotry, sexism, xenophobia are the easiest ways to avoid and divide substantive conversations of classism. Injustice of any kind is a loose thread on the fabric of society just waiting to catch. And it will catch if we do not address racism, if we do not address the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, if we do not address mass incarceration, if we do not address the disproportion of mental health care within our communities, if we do not address the injustices of our immigration system, if we do not address the injustices of education inequity, these are all loose threads just waiting to catch on society.
Anybody else having trouble following these word salads that she's throwing together for us?
It's everywhere.
I mean, she's basically just a communist radical, if you want to break it down, and it's all about economic inequality. Folks, that's communism. That's socialism. That's not this country. And just to remind you, in case you forgot,
Radical doesn't mean crazy.
why would one ever think that? You know, why would we ever think that radical meant crazy, particularly after listening to a very, very obviously not crazy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I almost said Ocasio.
You know, I think she really believes this, though.
Well, I think she believes it to the extent that she might believe, you know, fairy tales and other things. I mean, she believes it, but has she really thought it through?
No, of course.
I think she believes that she sounds fantastic verbalizing all of this.
Oh, and I love her cadence, too, as she's trying to build up that cadence of the resistance. Anyway.
Who is she talking to, though? That's
she was
another
talking
scary.
to...
No, I know she's talking to get all of this ammunition going.
Uh-huh. Well, that's Reverend Al Sharpton's group, the National Action Network. I mean, she's talking to... they're trying to elevate Al Sharpton. All of a sudden, he's now become some kind of civil rights icon. I mean, I'm sorry, but those of us that remember back to the 90s know who Al Sharpton is, but the media is assisting him in remaking himself. And another thing that happened at this National Action Network meeting last week that I think you got to know about is they stood up all of the Democrat presidential candidates and essentially made them buy into the idea of financial reparations for slavery. And that includes Kamala Harris. And I'm going to run through these in the order that you will hear them in the next audio clip, just so you know who they are. The first person who buys into it, Kamala Harris. And then you've got Robert Francis O'Rourke, known to some as Beto. Then you've got Bernie Sanders. Then New York's Kristen Gillibrand. Then you got Pocahontas Warren. And finally, you finish up with Julian Castro. All of them say that they're in favor of reparations for slavery.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has proposed a bill to form a commission to study how to do reparations.
When I am elected president, I will sign it.
Would you sign that bill? Yes.
Beto.
Yes, would you sign it?
If the House and Senate pass that bill, of course I would sign it.
I firmly support Congresswoman Jackson Lee's bill to create a commission to study reparations.
Gillibrand.
Would you sign the bill for reparations?
Yes, I would. I already support that bill.
Pocahontas.
There are things that we need to do in this country that have been a long time in coming. One of those is to move forward with reparations.
Think about that. This is divide and conquer politics, folks. I mean, none of us in this country ever owned a slave. And none of us ever were slaves. Now, some of us came from families that did own slaves, and some of us came from families that were enslaved, but not all of us. Not all of us were equal participants in something that happened 100 plus years ago. But what they're talking about is making all of us equal participants in paying to somebody else for that. And I just don't understand, why are we going backwards? Why are we moving back into racial identity politics and divide and conquer in this country? I thought this country was supposed to be a melting pot and we would get past all of that. But it seems like the Democrats are hell-bent on taking us back to that language of struggle, that language of resistance, and the disputes between people based on skin color. I think they intend to take us right back there. And you heard that from some of what was going on last week in the National Action Network. Now, we got one more story that we want to cover this week, and that was Congressman Devin Nunes of California, who's one of my very favorites, actually, out there. He's one of the few that's really tried to look into all of this Russiagate nonsense and peel back some of the lies that are out there. And he said yesterday on Maria Bartiromo's program that he's going to be making 8 criminal referrals to AG William Barr this week. And we're going to cover what some of those are, but I wanted to start you out with a comment he made just about the Democrat lies, and I think this pretty well sums up the whole Russiagate story for you right here.
If you take what the Democrats have said throughout the last 2.5 years, there's only one thing that you can be certain of, and that is whatever they tell you is wrong or a lie, or they actually mean the opposite.
That pretty well sums it up, doesn't it, everybody? Isn't that what we've seen over the past 2 years? That whatever they tell us is either wrong or it's a lie or they really mean the opposite. Well, with folks like Devin Nunes, straight shooters like him, you can take what he says to the bank. He's not lying to you. And one of the things he's saying is this week he's making 8 separate criminal referrals over some of this Russiagate stuff as well as some of the FISA abuses that preceded it.
We've been working on this for 2.5 years, compiling information, right, as we've continued this investigation. We couldn't really send these criminal referrals over without an attorney general in place. So we're prepared this week to notify the attorney general that we're prepared to send those referrals over and brief him if he wishes to be briefed. We think they're pretty clear. But as of right now, this may not be all of them, but this cleans up quite a bit. We have 8 referrals that we're prepared to send over to the Attorney General this week.
So you catch that 8 criminal referrals. Now, he goes on to explain that 5 of those referrals are direct criminal referrals where they name the individual that they think should be charged, including with crimes such as lying to Congress, and they name the actual offense. And so that's 5 of those. But 3 of the referrals are actually more general. And they could actually sweep up a lot of people in the actual criminal referrals of those other 3 issues. So while we do have that clip there where he kind of goes through the details, it's a little over 1.5 minutes. So we're just going to have to suggest that you go out there and you watch that on Maria Bartiromo, because we got the final clip when we come back from the break for you from what Congressman Devin Nunes said yesterday. And the final clip is where he sums up some of the compromises that affect the Mueller investigation and how terribly compromised this investigation team actually was. And I think that's really interesting. You're going to want to hear about that as well as our Out There when we come back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We're ready to go out there, but I know, Morgan, you have a little bit more to wrap up.
I got to share this one more clip with you from Congressman Nunes because you got to hear what he has to say about just how compromised the Mueller investigation actually was.
Many people that are on the team, the Mueller team, are involved in a lot of these conspiracies, right? So you have the leader on the team, the deputy supposedly, and another top lawyer. Were both involved in the chain of custody of the Steele dossier, the Democratic Oppo Dirt. It is impossible for me to believe that those two lawyers, very smart lawyers, didn't know in the middle of 2016 that information was dirt coming from the Democrats. It's impossible. The other two, you had two FBI agents, Strzok and Page, who were kicked off the Mueller team. So I want the underlying information because I think the indictments that were made by the Mueller team, I think some are very questionable. And I think there's pieces of them that always read like Russian spy novels. That was done on purpose to create a narrative to make the American people think, as they were indicting these people, that somehow this had to do with collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And so what do I want about the Mueller report? I don't care what's in the Mueller report. Matter of fact, I call it the Mueller dossier. What I want is the information underlying the report so that we can actually look into it. Every time we peel back the onion in this case, what do we find? We find out that somehow high-level officials within the DOJ and FBI were misleading the American people and the court.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. High-level officials within the DOJ and the FBI were misleading America and the FISA court. I mean, that almost could be an Out There segment. But I wanted you to hear that, folks, before we jumped into our Out There segment. And we do want to cover this, what we've got in the Out There segment, because this is an issue that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, calls an urgent threat. And that is a new kind of disease that's out there, and it's a disease caused by a new kind of microbe. We're used to viruses and bacteria, and with respect to bacteria, we're familiar with the idea that all of the antibiotics we've been taking and giving to our farm animals and, pouring in our farm fisheries or fishery farms and other things have been creating antibiotic resistance out there. And we're all familiar with the idea that there is MRSA, methicillin-resistant staph infection, and other things that are out there that are resistant to medications that we have. But now we've got something new that's resistant that we really haven't dealt with before, and that's a fungus. A fungus that you as a human being can contract that is now resistant to drugs and medication, kind of like MRSA is. Now, what's a fungus? I mean, think about mushrooms. So if you think about this, it is pretty gross, but if you're to get a fungus into your body, what you're actually doing is you're actually growing mushrooms and other fungus. If you've ever seen a loaf of bread with the hair that grows out of it and stuff, you're actually doing that inside your own body.
What do we have to do to get this?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Pat George, because apparently it's quite common at hospitals. Now, what's interesting about this is this particular kind of fungus, which is called Candida auris. That's A-U-R-I-S, Candida auris. And the auris means it's an ear fungus. That's where it started out, like audio or audible. It comes from that same Latin root, and it relates to this is an ear fungus. So that's where it started. The first case of this ever seen in the whole world that we knew about was in 2009 in Tokyo, where about a 70-year-old Japanese lady came in, and she actually had this fungus in her ear canal.
Ear fungus, not to be confused with ear virus.
Correct. Not an ear virus, but an ear fungus. And this one's a nasty one. I mean, the CDC calls it, and I'm quoting now, a creature from the Black Lagoon. They say it bubbled up and now it's everywhere. So it just came, the first case we ever heard of this, first time we ever discovered this ear fungus was in 2009 in Tokyo. And since then, it's swept through a hospital in Valencia, Spain, a neonatal unit in Venezuela. It's majorly spread throughout India and Pakistan. It's also spread through South Africa. It's even in the UK, where they had an outbreak at one particular hospital called Royal Brompton. And it caused them to have to shut down their ICU, the intensive care unit, for 2 weeks, 2 full weeks. They had more than 50 cases in this outbreak. It actually turned out to be 72 cases in the outbreak there in the UK. And the problem that they have, as you learn, and this was just written up in the New York Times recently, so there's a fantastic article, probably take you a half an hour to read it, though, with a lot of detail on this, but they're having a really hard time once this particular fungus gets established in a hospital room. It's almost impossible for them to get rid of it because it apparently will grow on literally anything in the room, and it gets into all the little crevices and everything else. So at the British hospital, they came in and they basically used hydrogen peroxide vapor, and they sprayed it all over the rooms, and it goes in all the little cracks and crevices, and that was able to kill everything in the room, but it didn't get rid of this particular fungus. So they put a little plate to check if they'd gotten rid of all the microbes in the room. They put that in the center of the room, and the fungus started growing again on the medium in the plate. So they knew they hadn't gotten rid of it. Now, just in case you were wondering, this has made it all the way to the United States now. And this is now something that you can find throughout New York and New Jersey, also throughout Illinois, and our very own state of Florida. We're one of the lucky handful of states in the U.S. where this has actually been documented to exist. In fact, last May, there was actually an elderly man in Brooklyn who was admitted to the hospital for abdominal pain, and he was found to be fully colonized with this already. So he didn't pick it up from the hospital, we don't think. He picked it up somewhere out in his environment in Brooklyn, New York. It fully colonized his body, and then when he went in for surgery, they realized, hey, we can't do surgery on you because, you've got this terrible candida infection it wound up killing him. So, and it basically kills about half of the people that it infects.
But we're not hearing a lot about it.
You're not hearing anything about it.
Oh, we will in about 3 weeks, a month. He's always about that far ahead.
Well, and the thing is, when you have an outbreak at a hospital or something like that, you'd think it would be front page news. But as you learn when you read about this UK hospital outbreak, they actually suppress the information. They don't announce it. There's no requirement that they tell the public, hey, we've got an ongoing outbreak of a medication-resistant fungus here that could kill you if you bring yourself and check yourself into our hospital. They don't do any of that. They keep it totally quiet.
They just can't say there's a fungus among us.
Can you imagine that? The hospitals where it's been found, just tweet that.
I want to just tell you real quickly about what happened at the hospital in Valencia, Spain, because it was about a 1,000-bed hospital, and 372 people at that hospital became colonized with this fungus before the hospital even realized what was going on. 85 of those people ended up developing bloodstream infections, and half of those, so about 45 people, wound up dying within 30 days. Folks, this is what Connecticut's deputy state epidemiologist says is the top threat among, contractable viruses, bacteria, and fungi. This is at the top now. And it didn't even exist 10 years ago, as far as we knew. Folks, be watching for it. Candida auris. That's out there. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.